A graphical representation of scarcity and opportunity cost is something we call the production possibilities curve. Okay? The production possibilities curve illustrates the maximum output we can produce given our current resources. The book uses the example of guns and butter. In their example, guns represent military goods. Butter represents civilian goods, and they're talking about the production possibilities curve of the United States government. If I want more guns, I have to give up more butter. There's an allocation there that we're talking about. I can go from a lot of guns and a little bit of butter all the way to very few guns and a lot of butter. All this tells us is where our maximum is. Okay? I want to identify 3 points on this curve. There's point A, point B, and point C. According to our production possibilities curve, point A represents anything that's inside of that curve. Anything on the inside of the curve, we would say is inefficient. We are not fully utilizing our resources. Anything at point B, which is anything on the curve, we can say is efficient. We are fully utilizing our resources. Point C, on the other hand, is what we would call unattainable. It lies outside of the curve. It's greater than the maximum we can produce right now. Don't be confused with where we are on the curve. Economists aren't concerned with that. Economists are purely concerned with the fact that you're either on, inside, or outside of the curve. Where we sit on the curve is a policy. It's somebody's idea of where the best point is. As economists, we're only concerned with efficiency, inefficiency, or unattainability. So be careful of that. There is no optimal point on the curve. That's opinion. But this curve shows us that we have to make choices. That's an opportunity cost. It also shows us there's only so much we can do. That's scarcity. Now, one other thing that this curve shows us, the reason that this curve is bowed and not a straight line is that resources are a one-for-one exchange. If we actually look at this curve, we will see that in order to get more of one thing, if you look at just these distances right here, on those lines I've dropped down, the further towards the ends you get, the greater the opportunity cost becomes. Meaning that in order to get more butter, I have to give up more and more guns just to get a little bit more butter. It's what we call increasing opportunity cost. The reason for that is that resources are not equally desirable for each one of these production things. So we have to watch that. It's not a one-to-one trade. Towards the ends, you're giving up more and more of one thing to get a little bit less, a little bit more of the other. You increasingly sacrifice one to get incremental increases in the other. So be careful about that. The book gives you an example of the North Korean military. Right now, what you're seeing in North Korea is they're putting a lot of their efforts into guns. The result of that is that their people are starving right now. That is happening because they have allocated their money towards guns. Their resources are all towards their military. And because of that, the result is there's no butter. So it's a balancing act that we have to watch. Now, this curve is also able to be moved. It can move in either direction. That curve shifts out, and that curve can shift in. Two things decide what that curve is doing, where it's moving. The first of those is technology. If we come up with a better technology, it allows us to use existing resources and produce more, to become more productive. That's an increase in technology. That would shift the curve out. Eventually we can make point C attainable that way. The second thing that moves that curve is resources. Resources also shifts the curve. And that can be just the birth of new people. As more and more population grows, that's a resource. But it can be thought of another way. One of the great reasons that in the United States we have mandatory education is that we're increasing the knowledge and skills of the workforce. That's a resource. Because we have an educated workforce, that resource is shifted out. So increasing resources or increasing technology can push that curve out. But it also works in reverse. There are parts of the world where their economies are actually shrinking. That can happen because their technology is going down or because their resources are going down. If you look in sub-Saharan Africa right now, one of the things you'll see quite often is civil war or war between nations. As those cut the population, you're cutting out resources. That's coming back. Another thing you see during war times is the destruction of capital goods. That is going to have an impact on your resources. So resources can change. That's what shifts this curve. This curve is very important in that it is a graphical representation of the concepts in economics. It tells you choices have to be made because things are scarce. These are the only two ways to move that. Okay, now let's move on to another concept.